cervical plexus block. Cervical plexus is located on the lateral side of the neck, and now we're going to review the functional regional anesthesia anatomy that is necessary to accomplish the block of the cervical plexus. Let's review the superficial landmarks here. What we see here is the jugular notch. In here is the omoclavicular triangle, and now we have the clavicle. If you rotate this a little bit, you can see that on that particular side there is external jugular vein, but most importantly to recognize is the anatomy of the lateral side of the neck, and to actually notice the sternal head of the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the clavicular head of the sternocleidomastoid. Of course, the sternocleidomastoid muscle stretches between the clavicle and the sternum and connects to the mastoid process, and therefore the name sternocleidomastoid muscle. If we dissect this a little bit, now you can see the sternocleidomastoid muscle underneath the skin and subcutaneous tissue. Now, in here you can also see the platysma muscle up here, and that is now the omoclavicular triangle, clavicle, and the external jugular vein. Let's click those off now, and let's now concentrate on the lateral aspect of the neck behind the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Actually, the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle at the midpoint between the clavicle and the mastoid process is where we will locate the cervical plexus. Cervical plexus comes out of at the midpoint of the sternocleidomastoid muscle and lies basically right over the middle scalene muscle, as you can see over here. So cervical plexus provides branches for innervation of the lateral and anterior aspect of the neck, and there are several branches that we should just briefly discuss. This is the transverse cervical nerve. That is the great auricular nerve. We zoom out a little bit here, and now we get to the lesser occipital nerve and the accessory nerve. And here we have the supraclavicular nerves, which are nerves that innervate the skin on the anterolateral aspect of the neck over the clavicle. Therefore, when one is performing, let's say, surgery over the clavicle, the block of the superficial cervical plexus is necessary for complete anesthesia. But again, that plexus is oftentimes blocked simply by performing an interscalene brachioplexus, because the interscalene brachioplexus conveys the local anesthetic underneath the cervical fascia to block the superficial cervical plexus. And just the same, injection of a local anesthetic inside the interscalene space, and that is the anterior scalene muscle and the middle scalene muscle, and we dissect it a bit more. Now we can see how injection of a local anesthetic inside the interscalene brachioplexus space, which is right here. So you would normally go through the middle scalene muscle to insert the needle into the interscalene space, but then injection of the local anesthetic there usually anesthetizes the cervical plexus as well as the phrenic nerve, unfortunately. Okay, so let's just also pay attention to the anatomy here in this region. Even though the cervical plexus is actually very superficial, what really happens here, the anterolateral aspect of the neck has a lot of vital structures that pose a great danger with performing this block if not careful. As an example, that's the upper trunk of the brachioplexus, which is very easy to enter with a sharp gauge needle when performing superficial cervical plexus. Also, there is the transverse cervical artery, the external jugular vein, the dorsal scapular artery. There here is on the more medial side, internal jugular vein, and the carotid artery, and things like that. So there's a lot of structures, a lot of things that can go wrong. So even though cervical plexus block superficially is easy to perform, as a matter of fact, most of the time when one inserts local anesthetic, injects local anesthetic for the skin anesthesia before performing an interscalene brachioplexus block, the cervical plexus is oftentimes actually blocked by simple injection of the local anesthetic superficially and superficial to the cervical fascia.